I'm super excited to be here today, and I want to say a little bit about what I do and why retros are so important to me. Like, why am I here telling you guys about retros today? Um, Here at Carbon 5, we work with clients to develop software. So we're a digital project development consultancy. We have like true partnerships with our clients across multiple disciplines to create software. So we'll have folks on our teams who are software developers, designers, product manager, and we really need to work together. Our process, like working with clients, we typically have an engagement that lasts maybe 3 to 6 months, during which time we're figuring out what to build. We're actually doing some user testing in there, and then getting into a really tight cycle of building building features, releasing them, learning from them, and launching a product. So we're doing a ton of work, and like I said before, it's like we have a new team every 3 to 6 months. And so part of that is really getting that team to be as functional as possible as early as possible. So I want to share a sort of a paradigm of team dynamics. This is from Bruce Tuckman's Stages of Group Development, which has actually been around since the 1960s. But it is basically saying that new teams go through certain stages where the team is forming, people kind of get to know each other. Then you get into this phase of storming, where the team is just kind of thrashing about, like kind of hashing out what are the different roles and responsibilities, what are the personalities, how can we work together. Then we get to norming. So, the team is kind of figuring out how to work together, and then performing. So the team is really like a well-oiled machine. We're working well together. We can anticipate people's needs and really like work well together as a team. And then typically something changes. Someone leaves the team, someone joins the team, there's some new goals, and you get plunged right back into that forming stage. So we see this on every project, and I think if you can think back to the teams that you work with, you can probably identify with this. And we really want to accelerate this process as much as we can, so we get into that norming, performing world as quickly as possible. So what I want to talk about today is using retros, this like once a week kind of ritual, but tradition that your team can have to really get your team working better. So our plan for today is to talk a little bit about the values of retros. Then we're going to go step by step how to run an effective retro, and I'll show you some techniques and some tools for doing that. Then we're going to talk about dealing with tricky situations. So situations where people are maybe not behaving the way you might want them to, or your retros just aren't running as smoothly as you like. What can you do about that? We'll touch briefly on what to do about issues that are bigger than a retro, because retros can bring up some stuff that maybe can't be handled within the retro environment. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A box. You can just click that and enter in any questions, and then we'll answer them at the end. So first, the value of retros. I think I'm a little bit preaching to the choir since you're already here and you're already curious to learn about retros, but I want to talk about some benefits of retros that maybe you haven't really thought about. So first, does this sound like your team? Are these kind of common team challenges, things that you can identify with? The first category there is really having too much work. Your team is missing deadlines. There's a to-do list for your team that's a mile long, and it is growing. It's not getting any shorter. You don't feel like you're making progress. You're too busy to think ahead and to plan, and your team is constantly being asked to deliver additional work. So that big workload. The next category there is poor communication. So there's frequent miscommunication between people on your team, and people are often confused about what's expected of them or what they can expect of other people. And then finally, everyone on the team is feeling stressed, probably related to that big workload. And then also there could be tension between particular individuals. That is maybe a challenge for them as well as for the rest of the team. So if this sounds like things that are happening on your team, I'm sure you feel that there's a lot of challenges and there's really no time available to fix those problems. How can you think about those challenges when you probably barely have time to get lunch or go to the bathroom, let alone fix broken processes or like handle frustrated coworkers? So I want to share that the retro is really the most important meeting of the week. So this is 1 hour during the week when you and your team can clear out some time and space and really think about what is what are some of the issues you're facing, and what are some concrete, small, iterative ways that you can tackle those issues. So you can use a weekly retro to understand your team's challenges, to really get like from all different people's perspectives what's going on, not just the challenges but the successes as well. And you can really dig into the root causes of those things. You can come up with actionable solutions for your team, so things that can actually be done by your team where you're not dependent on upper management. Things that you can actually experiment with and try within a week, and see some results fast. You can use a weekly retro also to improve communication. So providing a structured way for your team to provide feedback can really let people share what they're thinking in a way that's sort of non-threatening. And then finally, you can use a weekly retro to build your team's psychological safety. This is sort of a big buzzword right now, and I will admit this is going to be a theme running through today's webinar. So a little bit of context on this if you're not familiar. Google's rework project was a sort of a research study done on teams at Google to try and understand what makes teams happy and successful. And they really identified a few pieces that make teams feel safe. So the teams that are happy, the teams that are performing really well, have a few things in common. So those are teams where it's okay to make mistakes, to take risks. People are comfortable asking people for help. It's okay to be a little bit different from your teammates. People can bring up tough issues, and people really feel valued. So retros are really an opportunity to create that environment and to establish team norms that foster psychological safety. So by the end of today, you're going to leave with a toolbox of tactics to improve your team. So you'll have actual things that you can put in practice this week to really start improving the way your team works together. And hopefully you'll begin to see some results. And as Nancy mentioned, she's going to send out some links and resources that we're going to talk about today. So you'll have all this stuff at your fingertips. So let's talk about step by step how to run an effective retro. First, the logistics. Who should be there? It's really the team of people who work together day to day. Like who is that core team? Sometimes you can have stakeholders or managers in the retro. Often I find it doesn't really help because they're coming at things from a different perspective. Maybe it's helpful for them to see how people are feeling, but at least initially, having kind of high ups in the room can make people a little bit more reticent to share what's going on. So I would say really just start with the people who are working day to day. Retros, I think they're very helpful when they're weekly. That way, anything that's come up as an issue gets addressed right away. So you can set out a block of time, 45 to 60 minutes. The duration kind of depends on how many people are on your team. We'll go over sort of how this retro is working, but you want to provide time for each person to talk about their feedback. So if you have a big team of 10 people, you might need 60 minutes. If you have a smaller team, less time. But I would say, give yourself 60 minutes and end early if you can, rather than feeling like things are really rushed. Schedule this in a conference room that has a big table or wall space where you can, use some sticky notes and spread things out. And if you have remote teams, use something like Zoom or some other screen share program. I'll say more about that in a minute. And then just to kind of reiterate the whole point of these retros, why are you doing it? It's really to improve the way your team works together. So it's not necessarily to have like a cathartic session where everybody complains. It's really to improve the way your team is working. More and more, we're seeing teams where one or more people is remote. Maybe people are working from home, or you have a couple different office locations, or there are people who just are always remote. They don't come into the office. They work from another location. So we really try. At Carbon 5, we have a ton of folks who work remotely. We have 5 offices across the US. So we do a lot to consciously be aware of making the situation great for folks who are remote as well as folks who are in person. And we really want to create an equal playing field where everyone is on equal footing. So if you have even one remote person on your team, I really recommend using a product like Zoom or some other screen share so that everyone can join individually. So rather than having like a conference room of people plus one person joining individually, have everybody join from their desk. That really makes everybody, equal. And then ensure that the audio is crisp. So have everyone wear a headset. You can get some really good headsets in like the $30 to $60 range. So it's not a big expenditure. And it really makes a difference when you're not hearing a bunch of background noise. It just really helps for the communication. So these are just some sort of logistical things, but I think they really, really help if you have a remote team. The tools that you'll need for a sort of analog retro where everyone's in person, you'll want some Post-it notes, some pens, and then a wall or table to stick those stickies onto, those Post-it notes. You're also going to want a timer, so you could just use your phone for this. And then if you have a remote team, we really recommend using Stickies.io. Stickies is a product that Carbon 5 developed, and I'm going to show that to you in a few minutes. There are a ton of retro tools out there. We like Stickies because it's so flexible. A lot of different things can work. But if you're using, if you have folks who are remote, forcing them to look at like physical stickies many feet away from the camera is really not going to work. So, so use a product for that. You want to set the right tone. Start on time, especially if you have remote folks. It's a waste of time and it's pretty disrespectful to keep people waiting. So I really advocate for starting on time and then ending on time so that whatever's happening next, people can start on time. You want to welcome everyone, kind of take a beat to let folks settle in and say, we're super happy you're here. This is the purpose of our retro, and explain how it works so that everyone understands what's going on. And then you can also model best practices, and I'll show you what some of those best practices are as we go along. Because again, one of the points of the retro is to kind of establish those team norms and think about how you want your team to communicate with each other, and you want to set the right tone and create the environment for that to happen. So here's how it works. Each person writes their reflections on stickies, and then you go around the room and people read their stickies. You cluster the stickies by topic, and then you discuss the most important topics. So I'll go into a little more detail about each of these. When writing reflections on stickies, we love to use a couple of different sentence structures. The first is I like. So I like, whatever went well this past week. Things that you'd like to improve upon, we really advocate using the phrase I wish rather than I hate that this happened. Phrase it like I wish. So you're really making yourself into an optimist, and you're really thinking about how do you want things to be rather than how are things right now and what's wrong with that. You're really kind of shifting the mind frame of that, which makes it much easier for other people to understand. And it really removes some of that negative emotional reaction that might happen if someone's reading something that's just I really hate this. Another way to sort of parse your reflection is to say, I wonder. So what are you curious about? And really approaching this whole experience with curiosity is I think a really big tip in terms of keeping an open mind and really being curious about how your teammates' experience has been in this past week. So we also have people write their reflections independently, give people maybe 3 minutes to all write them, and then go around the room and read them. So we want people to write things down before they start hearing other people's reflections. There's a couple of really good research-based reasons for doing this. One is that if you, suppose the first person who, shares their reflection is, suppose that reflection is super negative, or it's really about a particular topic, you're going to anchor kind of unconsciously to what that person is saying. So then if you come up with what your thing is right after you've heard someone else, you're going to be highly influenced by what you just heard. So having the ability to write down those thoughts before you hear anybody else is super important. It also prevents the bandwagon effect, which is people, just jumping on the bandwagon oh yeah, that is, I totally agree with that. You may agree with that, but you probably also have things that you want to share that are unique and different. And so you want the opportunity to share that. Then we cluster the stickies by topic, and we'll show you that when we do a little demo in a minute. But that is actually it's a really effective way to take a lot of sort of unorganized data and find patterns. This is sort of if you've seen that movie, Beautiful Mind, or any kind of story of investigators where there's all this evidence up on the wall and people are making connections between it with little pieces of string. This process is also called making an affinity diagram. And it's a really good way to get like an objective group consensus when there's a lot of unstructured qualitative data. So we'll go through an example of that. And then you want to figure out which are the top most important topics, discuss them. And that discussion, that conversation is actually the most important part here. This whole process is not the point. It's having those conversations, surfacing those issues, having those conversations, and then writing some we will stickies or like action items that you can act on for the coming week. So I'm going to show you how this all works using a product called Stickies, which is something that Carbon 5 has developed. So I'm just going to pop into Stickies here. This is a board for creating these stickies. So I'll just really quickly demonstrate, like if I double click here, I get a sticky. I can say, I like our team. And this turns green when I say I like, and then I can say, I wish, and it turns orange. So you can quickly, like just with a scan of your eyeballs, understand like what are the orange things that you need to talk about and what are the green things that people are happy about. Couple quick things. You can see exactly who made each note by hovering over, and you see a little avatar of that person. And then you can have different stickies boards for different retro sessions, so like once a week. And then I also have a board here that's a parking lot, and I'll share more about that in a minute. But let's go through like a mock retro session. I'm going to put this into incognito mode. So I would do this at the start. I would explain, here's how it works. Everyone's going to put their stickies on here, set a timer for 3 minutes, and then enable incognito mode. And I can still see my own stickies here. This is Shannon, the sticky over here. This is my coworker Shannon, and she is going to type in her stickies during this like 3-minute period when we're all like reflecting and writing down what we want to write down. So Shannon's putting in her stickies. You'll notice that she can drag and drop those stickies on top of each other. I'll just show you that here. I can pull this apart. I can drag it and drop it. So we have like, this is Shannon's feedback. So, okay. And I think Shannon might have a little more to say. Awesome. So I'm going to pull us out of incognito mode. So our time for reflecting is done. And now we're going to go around the room and share what our reflections are. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to read through these. Nancy says, I like the new design direction. I wish we had more actionable stories in the backlog. Many of the stories are blocked right now. I wonder if we can move some of these features into a V2 so the end of month deadline would be more reasonable. And I wish we had more opportunities to get to know people on our team. So I'll read mine now. I like the new designs that Shannon shared. So in reality, I will take these 2 things about design and I will cluster them. We have a thing about design. I like that everyone's on board with our end of month deadline. I'm hearing about this deadline. Here's a couple of things about this deadline. Let's put these together. I like that we delivered a lot of stories this week. I like that the new designs unlocked 2 new streams of work. So I'm going to put this in with designs. Okay, here's Eric. Eric writes, the new designs are cool, and I'm glad I finished my story. Okay, so Eric's not really following directions here. We wanted him to say, I like, and I wish, but we'll take this. The new designs are cool. And then he says, I'm glad I finished my story. So this isn't totally what we want here. Finishing your work for the week, that's good. But maybe if he's like a way that we could that I could chat about with Eric after retro, like, hey, we're super excited to hear your feedback. We really value what you want to say, but think about ways that you could make this more constructive or more actionable. So maybe he would say this. I'm just gonna go into Eric's head here and say I like that Nancy paired with me so I could finish my story. So you're getting a little bit of gratitude towards your team member, and it's something a little bit more constructive than just yeah, I'm glad I got my work done. Okay, so Shannon's saying, I wish people gave more critical, detailed feedback during design reviews. Okay, so here's some information about design, and this is a little bit of orange going into our design column. Shannon says, I like pairing with Nancy to collaborate on design, implementation, and CSS. Okay, so now I have a couple things about pairing and collaboration. Shannon says, I wish I knew why we have such an aggressive deadline. There's this deadline thing again. And she says, I like getting lunch together as a team. I think we had some other team stuff going on here. Okay, so Now we've kind of grouped things a little bit. Maybe we have some stuff about pairing, or sorry, not about pairing, but about like actionable work or progress. So what I do here is I just take a scan and I look for the orange. Like, where do we have the most orange? Another thing you can do is folks can vote on what's most important to them. So maybe we have a lot of people who are like, we want to talk about this aggressive deadline. Let's talk about this some more. So people can kind of pile on and +1 over here. So let's talk about this deadline thing. So I'm saying here, I like everyone's on board with our end of month deadline. Nancy says, I wonder if we can move these out of some of these features out of the deadline. And then Shannon saying, I wish I knew why we have such an aggressive deadline. So it seems like kind of the backstory to this team here is that we have a really aggressive deadline. Maybe me, the PM, thinks everybody's on board, but everybody's not really on board. So this is something we should probably talk about. So we could have a we will statement about this aggressive deadline. So maybe that thing is, we will talk about the reasons for our deadline and see if we can punt some features to the next milestone. That could be one we will here. Or if we really truly have our conversation here and we find that yeah, okay, we can't get rid of any of those features. We have this crazy aggressive deadline. I don't think we're going to make it. We could say we will ask Hinge Manager if we can have someone else join our team for the next 3 weeks, maybe, to meet that deadline. So what are some actionable things we can do about this aggressive deadline that we have committed ourselves to that is causing us stress? I'll just go through one other example here. This is for design. We got some new designs. They're really cool. But Shannon, who in this case is our designer, she's saying, I wish people gave more detailed or critical feedback during design reviews. This could be a great opportunity for Shannon to share, hey, we had this design review. I felt like you guys didn't really pay attention or didn't really tell me what you really thought. And I really want to hear it. And that might be total news to everybody else in here who's just like, I like the designs. Everything looks great. 2 thumbs up. But Shannon's like, I want more from you guys. I want more feedback. So maybe we will say, we will provide more detailed feedback. Shannon will help us with questions she has, which we can answer. Maybe Shannon's like, I don't know if this, login flow is exactly what we have in mind. So this is just an opportunity to provide feedback about your past week and then have some actionable we wills. So let's see, I'm going to hop back into our slides here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a good we will. So those are those blue we will. What are we going to do as a team? They're not about blame. So we're not going to say we will not let Jen ever commit to a deadline without us. That's probably actually a good we will, but maybe we can do something a little more constructive. We wills are suggested by all team members, not just the team lead. So as the team lead, or the person who's facilitating this retro, you could say, hey team, how might we work on this? What are some things we can try, rather than having the team lead come up with all the solutions. We wills are kind of experimental. You don't know if it's going to work, but it's going to be small and actionable and something you can complete within 1 week, so that there's really, it's kind of like a low stress situation to just try this thing out, right? So it's what's a small baby step you can do to make things better for your team. Good we wills can be assigned to a specific person, and it's clear when that thing is done. And good we wills are not too numerous. So maybe having 3 we wills is enough for the week. You can really help your team follow through on those we wills by posting them in places where people can see them. So maybe if you have those we wills that are assigned to particular people on the team, you can put them in your task manager. Those are actually tasks and action items that come out of this meeting. You can also post a link in Slack to the retro Stickies board to be like, hey, it's Monday morning. Just let's keep in mind the things we want to accomplish this week for our team. Here's a link to our Stickies board so you can all review. And we can also start the retro by reviewing the we wills from the prior week. So let's hop back into our Stickies board, and I'll show you, we can look at the we wills from this prior week, and we can see, like for design, suppose we had the situation where we didn't really have a lot of clarity, people were confused, and we said, we'll do a design review with the whole team. Well, we did a design review, and then for me, I just like to put this little sticky, or sorry, this little emoji, just like a checkbox. So at a quick scan, we can be like, yeah, we did these things this week. And maybe we had this we will that we shared our progress with the team. We did a demo in front of the whole company, and we're saying, oh, I wish we could do that more often. We have this we will, it says, we'll do a demo during all hands more often. Well, that's not really like actionable within a week, and we can't really say whether we've done that or not. So I would actually restructure this we will to say maybe a specific person, maybe it's Jen, will ask all hands organizer if we can have a demo spot every 4 weeks, suppose. And you'll notice this is not blue. We want it to be blue, so we can just change the color there. And suppose I did this, we'll just say check. Yeah, so now you get the idea, right? It's actionable. You can do it within a week, and then we can follow up and be like, did we actually do this thing? So it helps to start your retro by reviewing the we wills from the prior week, and then just like putting in this check boxes as we go. It really helps the team have ownership over that. Okay, have different people facilitate the retro each week. So it's not just like the team lead or the PM doing the retro. It could be anybody on the team. You can select that person and let them know, like, hey, next week, do you want to do retro? Okay, this week, pay extra attention. Let me share some blog posts and resources so you really feel prepared. And then if a new person joins your team, you want to share the retro process with them. And it's also good to have a refresher for the rest of the folks on the team. So share the broader goals, have a conversation. This is really an opportunity to have a conversation about our process and see what we can improve, and then briefly explain how that works. Okay, so now that you kind of understand the fundamentals of what a retro is for and how to do it, let's talk about tricky situations. So, sometimes people are, your retro doesn't go as smoothly as you like, I'll say that. So here's an example. You have a team member who won't participate. And I'm sure you've seen this, where someone comes in and they don't sit at the table. They sit at a chair on the edge of the room. Sometimes I've even seen people sit on the floor, and they're just spending the whole time on their laptop, but they're not doing anything with the retro. They're just there in body only. So first I would say, like, does that person actually need to be there? If they are not part of the day-to-day team, maybe they don't want to be there and they don't need to be there. So you could just communicate to them like, hey, you seem busy. Retro is really kind of a thing for the team. Maybe you don't need to be there. I mean, that maybe sounds harsh, but if they're not part of the team, it doesn't make sense for them to be there. Or maybe they only want to be there, every 4 weeks, or maybe they just want to have some visibility into what's happening in retro, and in which case they can look at the retro board after it happens, but they don't actually have to be there in person. That can be good for someone who's in a more of a manager role, or who's really like tangential to the team. If they do need to be there, really help them feel welcome. Invite them to pull up a chair, maybe talk with them outside of the retro to be like, we really value your feedback and your opinions. I really want to hear from you. Here's some ways you could do that. Alternatively, you could do a laptop-free retro. This really works only if you have folks that are all co-located. But if people close their laptops and they just have Post-its, you'll notice that there could be a totally different level of engagement where people can't be on Slack and distracted by other things. Another possibility is that there are too many people at the retro and therefore too many topics to talk about. So you're going to need to prioritize. You can do this by voting on the stickies that seem most relevant to you. So you can use in Stickies, we had that little +1 button in the bottom right where you could vote on things. If you're using like analog stickies on a table or a board, you can buy these little round dots that are really fun, where people could, maybe have like 3 or 4 dots per person, and then you can vote on the ones that you want to talk about. Or you could just mark it up with a pencil. People can just be like +1, +1, +1. Anyway, voting on the things that are most important to the team, and then talking about the topic with the most votes. You can also put a hot topic in a parking lot for a separate discussion. So if you feel like you're kind of going down a rabbit hole, you can have a parking lot, and I have done it like this. I have a separate sheet here that's the parking lot. So maybe we had a thing that's like a user testing plan, that we want to set up a user testing plan, but we're not going to hash through all the details in our retro. We just want to mark that we want to do this thing. This is a highly specialized question that's relevant to only 2 people, so we put it in the parking lot. This one is a decision that we're waiting on from someone outside of our day-to-day team. We're like, okay, yeah, we don't really need to talk about this. This is just, something for someone else to figure out. Then maybe we had a whole tangent about our team offsite, how we know we want to do more stuff together as a team. And we just had a whole tangent about offsite ideas. Let's put that here. It's in our parking lot. We will get to it later. So anyway, kind of being good with that parking lot so that you really focus the time that you spend together on the things that are going to be important for the most people. Another tricky situation is that people don't contribute. There's no topics to talk about. So there's a few different ways to approach this. One is to request that people pre-game for the retro. I personally keep a text file open on my computer throughout the week, and I will just put some thoughts in there for the retro. Like, oh, I noticed this thing, I want to bring this up at retro. And by the time the retro rolls around, I'm going to look at that list, and maybe I've got 5 things on there, and 3 of them seem irrelevant. They've kind of resolved themselves, but 2 seem pretty good. So I'm going to use those and put those in there. So having that text file to pregame. I've also seen teams where they have some house rules, like everyone's got to bring 2 I likes and 2 I wishes, or they have to bring at least 3 items. So that can help people to contribute. That's kind of more of like a top-down thing. Another approach is sort of maybe more bottom up, is to start with 5 or 10 minutes of reflection. So often it's not like people don't have any feedback or don't have any thoughts. They just haven't had time to collect their thoughts. So maybe you want to start with 5 or 10 minutes of silence, and it can be an uncomfortably long period of time that's going to really force people to do some reflecting. So really get those reflections out there, and then maybe people can only contribute their top 3 or 4. We don't necessarily want to talk about 15 things from each person. We just want them to be able to have some time to collect what they actually do want to talk about. Another option is to really mix up the prompts. So I've talked about the I like, I wish, I wonder prompts, but there's dozens of prompts out there. And so you can mix it up week to week. You can have a thing that's like, what puzzled you this week? Again, that's like a prompt to get curious. You could have an all positive retro if you feel like things are kind of negative and churny for your team, and you want retro to just be like a positive experience. You could have the best part of my week was, or kudos to. So it's really like a thankfulness retro that would actually be really timely and fun to do before Thanksgiving. Like, hey, what are you thankful for your team this week? There's also there's a great website called Retromat that has some it's like a generator of fun retro prompts. We'll have that in the list of resources that we'll send out after this webinar. But there's tons of fun prompts. I want to reiterate that while I'm very into the process that we've talked about, it's not about the process. It's about generating those ideas and having those conversations. So however you get those conversations is basically whatever works for your team. Another tricky situation is that people have their guard up. They're not being candid or honest. And you really want to build psychological safety for this team. So probably the most straightforward way to do that is to lead by example. Thank people, celebrate their wins, share a topic where you're a little bit vulnerable just to make it okay to be a bit vulnerable, and then ask for feedback or help. So really lead by example. Another option is to start the session with an icebreaker. So there's some fun activities or icebreakers you can do that will just kind of loosen things up and get people out of the mindset that they were in when they walked in, because you don't know what the beginning part of their day was, but you want to kind of hit the reset button when they enter the retro space. A kind of bigger project would be to co-create a team agreement. And there'll be some links about this in the resources we send out, but this is basically having a separate session with your team to understand each person's professional goals, the way they like to work, and then creating a list of like norms and not quite like rules is the wrong word, but like an agreement that the team will follow, like how you'll work together, how to deal with like times of tension and things. That can be a really helpful way to build psychological safety with your team, and it's really probably the topic of a whole other webinar. Briefly, what about issues that are bigger than a retro? If you surface things that are beyond the scope of a we will, here at Carbon 5, we developed a product called Product Dartboard that we think of really as the super retro for your team. It's a 12-question quiz that you take, and it really helps identify what are those bigger issues. And then we have some resources for how to tackle those big issues, either within your team or within your organization. So that's just another option if you find things that are a little bit too big. So now I would love to open it up to some questions and answers, and understand what questions you guys have about retros, or what suggestions you would like to share with the group.
Thanks for sharing all your insights, Jen. So a few questions that came in here during the presentation. Stephanie asked, how often should you host retros? You mentioned having one every week. Is that something that's ideal, or can it be less often? I'm worried about meeting fatigue.
Yeah, good question. I think weekly really is the best cadence. If you do it any less often, issues can come up and kind of have time to fester and not get dealt with. So I would say better to have like more frequent, shorter retros rather than like longer retros that are further apart. And it's really like it's really, like I said before, like the most important meeting of the week. So don't scrimp on it. The other thing that people often do is they only do a retro if there's like a serious issue, like more of like a post-mortem, and that is like there's a big incident, like, you know, maybe there's a big outage in your product and you want to talk about what happened. That's important and necessary, but that's not the same thing as a retro. So like keep your postmortems and your retros separate. The retros are really all about like how you're working together. Yeah. What other questions?
So Damien asks, how much of a retro should be spent going over specific reasons why a given deliverable wasn't finished on time? And how do you balance actionable changes and avoid blaming a team member?
Yeah, good question. So there's a framework for asking questions and kind of like doing a root cause analysis, which is the 5 whys. So you could say like, okay, why wasn't this delivered on time? And or maybe the question is like, I wish we could deliver things on time. Okay, what more generally are the problems that are facing us in delivering things on time? Well, it's like we have too much to do, or it's like we have, you know, extra work that ends up on our plate. Why does that happen? And then just keep asking why to get to the root. And so it's really not about why didn't this person deliver on this certain day, but like what are the broader issues that contributed to that, and what can you do about those things? I think that was the first part of the question. Did I answer the whole thing there?
Yep. And then Andrew asks, are there certain projects that are better to have retros for, and other types of projects where you don't need to host a retro for?
I feel like any project can benefit from a retro. You could just try one and see what it does for you. I think projects that have a lot of collaboration are the ones that are really going to benefit. If there's a project you're working on with like just one person, you might not need a retro. Like you guys could just like get a coffee or go for a walk, just like talk about how is this project going. The retro really provides structure, so it helps when there's multiple people, multiple perspectives, particularly like teams that are not co-located. But I think almost any project could really benefit from it.
And then just a few more questions here. Lily asked, I've been running a few retros with my current team, but it often feels like it's just a group complaining session. Do you have any tips to help improve the conversation?
Totally. I think that's like like classic challenge. You could try having one of those all positive retros, right? Where it's like give thanks. I mean, Thanksgiving might be around the corner, so that's kind of a fun way to do it. Or really just think about like how can we be constructive? let's phrase things using positive language. The I like, I wish really helps. And you can be upfront with your team to be like, hey, I've noticed, the last few sessions have kind of been complaining sessions, which can be good, can be cathartic for the team, but let's try something different today. Let's really try to be constructive. And you can kind of call it out when people are really starting to vent and complain, to be like, okay, what could we do about this issue? Rather than focusing on the complaining. So there's a time and place for that, but retro becomes something that people don't look forward to if it's all about complaining. And your retro can be much, much more productive than that.
And another question here, David asked, how much does Stickies cost?
Ooh, good question. Stickies is totally free. And yeah, it's free. You can sign up with your like a Google account, basically. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for your answers, Jen. We're running right up on time here. So if there are any questions that we didn't get to, we'll reach out directly with answers via email. And then just a quick plug for our next Agile Growth Workshop coming up in January 2020. You can join us as Trace Meredith, our product designer at Carbon 5, shares insights on how developing an experiment-driven design process can effectively support product and team growth. And a link to the RSVP will be shared in the follow-up email everyone will be receiving. And thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you again next time.